knowledge is the most important thing to move us forward within the industry.
Thanks for joining us here on What Canna Radio, where we take pride in bringing a dose of reality to your conversations about hemp. We are very happy to say that today's episode is brought to you by CBD Peer. Please stick around to the end of the show to learn how you can get a 15% discount on their world-class American-made CBD products. My name is Aidan Washington. I'm happy to be your host today, and now enjoy the show.
Anna, it's a pleasure to have you on. I had the honor of being acknowledged and contributing to a paper that you produced on comparing industrial hemp fiber to cotton fiber for the fashion industry in particular, but potentially other industries as well. And so I'm really excited to be able to dive deeper into the paper, and then also kind of what you see for the future of the hemp industry and kind of where we're going in general for fashion. So for those that don't know you, could you tell a little bit about yourself, how you, what your background is, how you came into the hemp industry, and kind of where you're looking to go in the future?
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. So I'll start off. My name's Gabriela Duque, as you mentioned. I am 22 years old. I just graduated in RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, with a degree in industrial management engineering. And furthermore, within that aspect, I really focused my whole RPI path looking into a lot about research. I started sophomore year doing research, and I continued on, and pretty much like the closing aspect of my graduation was publishing this paper. We worked on it for 2 years, and so I'm very proud of being able to publish something that I really believe in.
Hey guys, I just want to jump in quickly and say if you want to check out the paper Anna published, you can check it out in the link in the description. And now back to the show.
And I started off in the industry, the fashion industry. That's where I started my knowledge with hemp, specifically hemp textiles. I had the summer of 2017. I was a sophomore going on to being a junior in college, and I had to do an internship. Like pretty much every single student, they're like, I need to do an internship, but I don't really have experience, so who's going to hire me? Because every single company wants someone with experience, but I'm wanting my first experience, so who's going to hire me? And so the easiest option for me was looking for an opportunity from my hometown. I'm from Cali, Colombia. And so it's easier, especially your first time, to find an opportunity with someone that you have contact with, someone that's a business owner or something like that. So I definitely went that route. And I found an opportunity with my little brother's mother's best friend, and she owns a high-end fashion company. It's very high-end, very not couture, but I would very describe it as very luxury items that she sells. And so I did an internship there, obviously within the engineering department, because I'm more about the engineering side, the process side, rather than more of the business side, and I'm not a very creative designer person. That's why I pretty much became an engineer. I'm not very creative and artsy in that way. And so I went into that process. I had a very good experience. And then that's where I started to think about the industry as a whole. But I didn't know any stats about it. I just knew what they were doing. But I was able to see a very hands-on experience because they're very high-end. So it's very manual labor. Nothing is mass-produced like you would think a t-shirt is. It's very step-by-step. And so there's obviously a lot of waste that you can see firsthand that you wouldn't see in a bigger production right off through the whole production. And I just kept on resonating, like, wait, like, what do they do with all these textiles? Is textile even like very polluting? And I just kept on rolling. And I actually had the opportunity when I went to my junior year to start a research opportunity within the industrial and systems engineering department. And that is where I got the opportunity of like, hey, look into something that you're interested in and go for it. And I was like, well, I have experience in the textile manufacturing industry, but I don't know anything about it. So let's look into that. And then the statistic that I was like, wait, how is this even possible? Is looking into how the textile industry is actually one of the most polluting industries in the world. And you would not think of that at all. People that think about textiles are like, it cannot be one of the most polluting industries. But then when you think about it more, you're like, the amount of clothes people consume, where does this come from? What processes it has to go through to actually become your clothing. What we see today is that's what makes it so impactful. And I just went on looking into things, and I bumped into hemp, and it was my perfect solution for all that I was looking for within the research, and that's how I started with hemp.
Gotcha. Very cool. That's yeah, taking the avenue of not necessarily being a hemp passionate person and then deciding to do hemp, but instead taking another avenue and then coming across hemp as the best material that you could potentially source it really gives more confidence in the industry and kind of like gives a value to it to say that it's actually better versus just all these hemp enthusiasts saying hemp will be save the world and everything. When investors looking at it, definitely having just all the enthusiasm only goes so far. You have to look at the economics of it, the environmental impact and everything. And actually, like just going through the paper that you wrote, it's just really fascinating to see how much, I mean, specifically with cotton, how much of a difference there is between cotton and the hemp industry, even with where the hemp industry is at now, without having all the specialized equipment, without having the specialized seed and all that kind of stuff. And so could you kind of expand a bit more into why is cotton just like the biggest source of material that we use for clothing, and that's why you chose to compare it with hemp, or was there other reasons to compare cotton with hemp?
So we had a couple of reasons. So specifically, we wanted, the reason why we tackled first textile selection, which was one of our main reasons why we focused on this, because my whole main overarching was like, let's fix something about this industry, because I couldn't tackle everything. There was so many aspects. This was like, it's just one research paper. My advisors were like, you cannot put everything into one paper. It would be too long. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on a specific aspect. And I kept on thinking, this is a big, huge domino effect. From what you start off with, it just completely affects everything else. Obviously, there are aspects within the way that if you make a correct decision, if you make this take option A over B, you'll obviously impact, but it essentially starts off with something. And so that's where I was like, I want to focus on textile selection, what you select to produce all these garments. And so that's where I started off with textiles. And within that, I decided first, let's look at what's the biggest issue. And I learned obviously that there are two different types of textiles, the synthetic fibers and then the more natural fibers. And when I saw synthetic fibers, I am not a chemical engineer, I'm an industrial engineer. And I was like, all these papers kind of make sense, but at the same time, I'm just starting off my first independent research. I don't want to delve into all of the chemical aspect of producing a synthetic fiber. I think I could not really impact that way. And so I was like, let's look at the natural fibers. And that's where I saw cotton and how it's produced like a plant. And I was like, oh, I've got that more innately in me. My family has farming in their family. Like in my family, we have farming and farms here in Colombia. So at least I have a notion of something like that. I have no notion of chemicals. I just took like Chem 1 when I was in college, and that was it. So I was like, this is not really for me, the synthetic aspect. I want to focus on cotton. And still, at the same time, it still was valid because cotton is one of the most produced fibers in the world. So I wasn't just choosing the easiest one. I was actually choosing tackling one of the biggest problems. So even though I did not choose to go towards the synthetic route, it is still a very important point to address within the textile industry.
Absolutely, yeah. So is majority of cotton production going into textiles, like for clothing primarily, or are there other avenues that cotton is going down?
So I don't really know like specific breakdown, it's like the percentage, but I do know that when we talk about the textile industry, we talk about cotton, for example, being produced for sheets, beddings, rugs, all of that, towels. So anything that you think about as a textile, it encompasses the textile industry. Things that you wouldn't really think about, like rugs, like you don't think about that as like the textile industry. Most people just think textile industry clothing, but it is inclusive of shoes. It includes all bedding aspects, a lot of different like curtains, a lot of things in your house you don't really think about textiles, but then when you really look at it, it's like, yes, there's a lot of other aspects apart from clothing. But cotton is definitely produced a lot for clothing and a lot for those household items like bedding, towels, things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. There are definitely a lot of products
Mm-hmm.
that are in the textile category. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And now, I mean, you targeted somewhat the processing and manufacturing, but you mostly targeted the agricultural production. Is that like really where the biggest amount of harm occurs between each source material versus hemp and cotton versus going into processing? Because I mean, looking at like the processing chart breakdown, it was pretty much very similar similarities in the whole supply chain, but like very little difference within just like how you get the fiber out of the plant and then into the stage of spinning. So was most of the damage done in agricultural production versus the actual processing itself?
I would say yes and no. It depends on what you look at. So if you look at, for example, all the chemicals that are used, although there's a great amount of pesticides used when growing a plant, there's also a great amount of chemicals used to be able to break down the fiber, make it smoother, bleaching, all types of coloring. So I wouldn't say that the biggest impact is in specifically one area, but there's definitely highlights within all of these areas. And how my research was focusing on the textile selection, so it was one of the first steps. We also found it very natural to start with the first steps. And we also decided on that because the research from the agricultural on for hemp production is very ongoing. So it's very changing. There's new things being proposed, and every single time it's changing. And we were like, I don't really think that I could provide with such a great conclusion if I did not have a stronger agricultural part first. And our intention obviously is building upon that paper for the future. So we wanted it to be more like a base of this is the first steps that you take for cotton. These are the first steps that you take for hemp textile. So what should we be focusing on to promote that being produced in the future? Because those are essentially the first steps. And if without those steps, there's not going to be any fiber formation, fiber extraction process, nothing of that of hemp. So we definitely wanted to focus on that. And especially me being an undergraduate, I wanted something that I could understand, something that I didn't really go off on a limb with. So I wanted something that I could really grasp, start off with that and build it. And so that's why we definitely chose first the agricultural part and having that paper be a base for more papers to grow from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, it was incredible. I mean, what was it? That's hemp is 70% cheaper or 73% cheaper to grow and produce per ton, right? So like essentially, it was that's just like incredibly. I mean, also now there was one particular point in the paper that was talking about, I wasn't 100% sure if I understood it correctly, but it was talking about the global hectares used, and was the number that was given, I can pull it up if need be, was the number given targeted on this is the percentage that it's using of the overall supply chain, and this is the percentage that it would need to use in order to supply like the current industry needs? Is that kind of where it's coming from?
So the global ecological footprint aspect. So ecological footprint is measured with global hectares, but essentially ecological footprint is it could be a measure for how impactful a textile is or any product, and it's one of many that you could use. And so essentially it says how much area do you need to be able to produce what you want to produce, and at the same time give back what you took from the planet, the earth, the environment for producing this product. And essentially when I was looking into the data that actually validated the fact to look into hemp was I looked into ecological footprint. And when I looked into it, I obviously had a standard, which was cotton. We chose that as the base standard. And we looked at the ecological footprint of hemp fiber was from 1.46 to 2.01. Compared GHA compared to cotton, which range was from 2.17 to 3.57. And so even at the highest ecological footprint of hemp, it doesn't even reach cotton's lowest ecological footprint. And so that was one of the moments where we're like, yes, this product we need to continue looking into. We need to base our research on all of these aspects. So we didn't really look into the environmental impact as the research per se. We use that knowledge that we know about hemp being very eco-friendly, or any other word people want to use, because people are kind of picky sometimes of what we should be using. I mean, less environmentally impactful. And so from that, we said, let's look into the data of what is hemp compared to cotton environmentally. And if it has a good standing, what we'll do is then look into the economics of it. Is it economically competitive? So our proposal is more on the economic side, based on the fact that it is sustainable. It can be more sustainable than cotton. So we definitely based ourselves on a lot of data collected over the years on hemp and compared it to cotton. And then we're like, because of this, we need to look into it. So let's see if it's economically competitive.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, the economics is one of the most important factors. As much as we want the world to be completely sustainable and we want everybody to switch to sustainable materials, if it's going to be a higher price and potentially lower characteristics for whatever characteristics you're looking for in the particular product, it doesn't it doesn't scale up, because companies just aren't going to have the interest to put it in, because you can do it on a small scale to an extent, but once you try to scale it up to a production line that's costing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, that's just adding a few dollars to each single piece adds millions or billions of dollars to it, right? So it's just an incredible investment, but just the more and more, I mean, from your paper, but then also I had a guy on, Bruce Dietzen, that built a hemp sports car out of hemp fiber composites, and just the aspects of the ecological footprint of it. He was comparing it to like carbon fiber and fiberglass, and saying how every pound of carbon fiber manufactured releases 31 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. Every pound of glass fiber produced releases 8 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. But the composite that he's manufacturing out of hemp, every pound of it manufactured removes 1.65 pounds of CO2 out of the atmosphere, right? So it's just like not even necessarily the growth factors, right, in terms of the pesticides and herbicides putting on it, how much fuel you're using, and all that kind of stuff, but just the simple fact that you're growing this plant produces a ton of biomass all in 1 acre, can absorb a ton of CO2 out of the atmosphere and potentially other harmful chemicals. And also be able to match the economics. Like, doing all that and matching economics is such a big feat. And so are you planning on potentially yourself adding to this research, or are you expecting somebody else, other people, to add to the research and kind of grow the paper or grow the studies from here?
We proposed it as both. We wanted it to be a paper that you can really look into, grab whatever you want from it, and build upon it. And that's basically what our discussion and conclusion talks about how this can grow, what are the gaps that we have. And our paper really identified the basic gaps that we had in the industry as a whole as hemp fiber, and we tried to fill those gaps in. And we tried our best to keep it very compact, but obviously things that we couldn't include just because of space, everything. But we try to keep the very important things in the paper so people can go and see, oh, you found this reference. Let's look into more of that because I'm more interested in this. You found this reference. So we try to reference a lot of things that are ongoing new research in the hemp fiber so that people they're really interested in this, and universities, institutes, organizations can look into this paper and see, oh, we should look into this. What about applying this within the fertilizer if you're more focused on agriculture? Or yes, this is economically competitive agricultural wise. Let's look into the industry because we're already on a good standing, we're ahead. So let's see what we can do in the future to be able to make it more industrial, have it leverage economies of scale. But I am very interested in continuing this research, growing it into other different papers that still grasp on what we found here today. We're currently not working on anything right now, but it's definitely our idea is to be able to continue to grow. We started this because my advisors were like, okay, can you tell us that this paper is really needed? Because this is the main thing that you need to prove to a publisher, that there's a gap. Because they could potentially say, no, there's tons of papers about this. Your paper does not add anything. And so that was where I struggled the most, because I was like, how can I add to this? There's so much information already out there, but there's still so much that we need to put out there. So that definitely was an aspect that I struggled a lot with. And then I realized when I kept on looking more into it, there was parts that were actually misleading. And so there was a lot of information, but a lot of them were either inaccurate, outdated, or very misleading. And we actually talk about it in our part of our paper, where we say we gathered all of the recommended input of seeds. So this is the seed rating, so how much seeds you put into an acre of land. And then we said, okay, apart from that, we want to be able to grow a certain quantity of hemp plants that will be able to produce a good standing fiber. And then we realized a lot of these ranges that they're giving farmers or people that are really interested in this are inaccurate, that you would not be able to get that amount of fiber and a good standing of growth, everything with these recommendations. And I was like, this is very, this is where my paper fits in, where we really verify the information. Because if somebody just posts out there or just publishes, you would need this amount of seed rating, but actually doesn't look into, with the seed rating, how much yield, meaning how many plants would you actually get with these plants, how much would you actually be able to produce with fiber. If those things are not looked into, you're just giving someone an amount of seeds that they're going to grow, but it's not going to be successful. And so that's where I was like, there's so much information, but if we can pile it together, verify it, provide a good standing, people can go look at the information, validate themselves as well, have a stepping stone for people to continue to grow research. That's what I found as a gap within the publishing or scientific papers out there. And that's what our paper actually provides.
While more clinical research is needed before we can make any medical claims, CBD has shown to greatly reduce inflammation, which can assist with ailments such as arthritis, chronic pain, and even anxiety. However, with so many CBD brands out there, it can be hard to distinguish which brands can offer top quality products while remaining affordable. Well, thanks to today's sponsor, CBD Peer, we can bring you just that. With decades of experience in the supplement industry, CBD Peer's team is offering What Can a Radio listeners a 15% discount to their American-made, high-quality, and yet affordable products. In fact, they're so confident you will love their products that they are offering a 90-day money-back guarantee. Just use the discount code WCD at checkout or click on the link in the description to get your 15% discount. We hope you enjoy their products just as much as we do. And now back to the show.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's so many studies. I mean, I'm sure there were studies based on stuff that happened in like the 1960s or something, but there's so many, like I remember reading a study from Europe that was like, oh, you can get 8 tons of fiber per acre, and it's like, well, I got like maybe 2 tons of fiber per acre, 3 tons at most, if I was like really going for it, right? I mean, that's also the factor of like, we don't have the genetics that are stabilized for our environment, or we don't have the proper growing methods and proper nutrient growth and everything, which is also an interesting point that you guys put into the paper. It's just that there's so much information out there that probably maybe it was truthful at one point in time, but it just isn't truthful today. And to have that as a starting place is definitely very challenging to go forward, because it's also kind of disheartening, right? Like you have this grand idea of you're going to have this huge amount of yield, and then you put the seed in the ground and you have half of that, a quarter of that, an eighth of that, right? And so it's like it kind of disencourages you to keep going forward, because the evidence that you're basing your facts on just,
you had your hopes up for something. Yes,
yeah,
definitely. And that's why we also in the paper note things. So although we say this is the ideal growth, you would also need to consider where you're growing it, also need to consider everything. We kind of like also say specifically in the discussion, we talk about the differences that you could find. So for example, we didn't consider seasonality. We considered only one growth per year, so one cultivation per year. But in like, for example, where I am in Colombia, you could grow it up to 3 times a year. But it's unrealistic to present the 3 times a year in the US, our research is in the United States 3 times a year. So all of these people that are interested are like, you can grow this 3 times a year. This is perfect. I can go year round. And then they're like in winter expecting hemp. And I'm like, we cannot do this, but we can also bring attention to it. We can say, yes, you can grow it in some certain parts of the world 3 times a year. You need to base yourself solely on where you're located, and that's where we also bring light to it. But it's very hard to present a whole research paper considering all the factors, because then you would not be able to have any conclusions. Because from one end, you'd be like, in the desert, it's like no chance you're going to get fiber, but at the same time in winter, so you're going to present this whole huge paper of how all of these different factors could influence. And so we just base ourselves on, this is the ideal situation. You can have this, you could have this. We're presenting the basic situation, the very conservative situation. It could grow from there. It could grow lower from there. And that's also why we also present low, medium, and high aspect to everything, because we don't want to present the best data that we found of hemp, and we don't want to present the worst data of cotton, because that would be biased, because then I would just be using the worst things from cotton and the best things from hemp and be like, hemp is fantastic, this is the solution. And then when everybody actually goes in and actually applies it, they realize most likely you're going to fall in the medium for both of them. So why not present the whole spectrum, and people will be able to decide, oh, this is our goal. We're going to start potentially at the low end and build ourselves up to the goal, which would be the high end for a lot of things like yield, fiber production. And so we decided on producing a more well-rounded, basic, conservative result rather than something unrealistic, or not necessarily unrealistic, but very
embellished.
Yes, embellished. And I feel that a lot of movements do that and are grasping on that, instead of just presenting the facts. This is what we have, this is what we need, and then growing from there. It's like more, we didn't want to sell hemp fiber, we just wanted to present it. And so that's definitely what we wanted to maintain, a less bias, very unbiased proposal, rather than having something that's practically that could go into like a website that says we love hemp and then produce just the hemp is fantastic, because we want to be realistic.
Absolutely, and that's very much needed for this industry. As you touched on, like there's so many advocates that are just gung ho about hemp. Hemp's going to replace every single thing. It can do everything. But there are, I mean, it has lots of things it can do, and there's lots of industries it can be supplied material into. But there's also there's limitations to every single thing we use, right? It's not going to be perfect all across the board, and so it's very important to have that. The reality of the situation, right, versus trying to embellish it and make it sound so much more superior than it is, and that's also just really good for industry too, right? I mean, like the community, yeah, exactly. The community around the hemp industry is very gung ho, and it's great for kind of like getting public awareness risen, right, and like getting people kind of more talking about it. They're talking about CBD. Oh, it's so great, it's so amazing. But when you get to the investors and you get to the companies that are like, okay, well, we're counting X amount of cents per pound, and we're counting each dollar value that's going into this and how it's going to make our supply chain more efficient and all this kind of stuff. All the good stories only go so far, and you need the actual data and the actual evidence to be able to prove that the story can be told in a real way. So that's, incredibly important. And I think, having this base structure, particularly for the fashion industry, but again, like just like the textiles industry, I mean, it even can be a feedstock into like composites, for example, right? Because you still have to use the weaving machines to manufacture the composites. There's of course non-wovens, but that's a different case. But so like the textile industry kind of feeds into all these different things, and I mean, as I keep on harping on, the fiber industry is really where hemp is going to surpass other things, because it can really go into all these different areas, and it is so much more sustainable to produce as a crop, that it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, at this point in time, really the only factors, and you also stated this in your paper, is just that the processing equipment isn't quite up to standard and up to spec to really like match other industries and really make it go full steam. But it's getting there, right? And I mean, as we get more papers like yours out that really prove those facts and those numbers and actually say, well, this is really economical, but it's also a great environmental factor, so you can tell your story and get your money too, right? And so it's definitely very much needed to kind of go forward. And so, I mean, there's lots of factors that kind of play into the industry in general, but out of the research that you did do, what are like maybe the top three things that need to happen within the hemp space, because I don't necessarily want to call it an industry because it's really a material that can supply other industries, right? But within the hemp space, what are the three like key factors that you think kind of need to be developed further to really get it to be able to match something like cotton and compete on a like a serious level?
So the one that I would place first, the one that is most important for me is knowledge. Coming from someone that did research, I found so many gaps. I found just basically because this plant was the one that was banned, that it had such a bad stigma around it. Everything, there's lack of knowledge, lack of research. We're so many years behind with a lot of things within research of this plant and its potential, that knowledge is the most important thing to move us forward within the industry. Being able to research, for me, we research agricultural part, but there is a need to research other aspects within the industry to improve it. And I basically would choose one that has like segments to it. So the first one would be knowledge, but underneath that, for example, we need to find a better production process that requires less energy. It's a very heavily energy-based production process to be able to extract quality hemp fiber. And so to be able to get to that point, we need a lot of research on new ways, innovative ways of extracting fiber that requires less energy, that doesn't set back the whole point of having hemp. Because there's a point where, yes, you could have amazing hemp fiber that could just be at the same texturally and all of the different qualities of cotton, but it's going to be worse or the same environmentally as the impact than cotton. And that's where I'm like, well, that's not the point. The point is not to just grab another plant, have it that natural fiber and be the substitute, but it's the same thing. We want a more sustainable substitute. We want something that will solve the issues that we're having, not just provide with like a little band-aid of, oh, it's hemp, it's fine, and not really looking into it. And so energy requirement is actually one of the biggest aspects, and is actually one of the biggest aspects of hemp still not getting to that level of, specifically hemp fiber, of being have a very low energy requirement. And when you see the breakdown, I looked a little bit more into the breakdown of where the impact of hemp has, like where are the aspects that consume the impact for the environment. The agricultural side was very slim. It didn't really have that much of an impact. It's a very resilient plant. It doesn't require that much. And compared to cotton is not a resilient plant. Cotton is very sensitive to the amount of water. It's very pesticides heavy. And so when I looked at to the agricultural side, it had a huge selling point for hemp. But when after that point in the production part of extracting and fiber formation, it had huge energy requirements. So I think that one of the biggest stepping stones after agricultural aspect is looking into being able to industrialize this, leverage economies of scale in a very sustainable way. Because there are solutions, but these solutions will not provide with what we really want, which is being able to have this fiber actually make a positive impact and reduce that statistic that I actually started my whole research on, which is one of the most polluting industries in the world. And so under that knowledge, I would definitely have in like energy requirement and production process, one of the biggest ones. And then currently we're unable to separate primary and secondary fibers within industrial hemp within the hemp fibers. And primary fibers are the one that really would provide with that like competitive edge for cotton, but the secondary fibers are the ones that really bring it down or like bring it back. And secondary fibers are not really that great for textile, like clothing production, but it's good for like more like rope or things like that. And so currently, as far as I know, there is no really good process to be able to separate them. And so what people are doing is looking at the time of harvesting to see where we can harvest so that there's less secondary fibers within the stem. But that's not really the best alternative. The best alternative is to be able to have a more homogeneous fiber when we're extracting it. And so that would fall into that. And my third one, I would say, would be knowledge within communities. So, and communities having it more inclusive rather than exclusive. I think that someone that I would not know about hemp. I come from a different perspective. I knew about hemp not because I was a hemp like passionate. It was just because I looked into the data and I found it. But this doesn't really happen. And so either there's a community that has a very skeptical, misinformed mind towards it, or there's a community that is skeptical because they think it's such a hoax. All of this is based on lack of knowledge. And if the industry is unable to present that knowledge in a way that will be compelling, that will be inclusive, that will say like, this is what it is, this is a real, like the realistic part of it, then it will just continue to be like pushed into their own little circle without being able to expand into something that will become more common. If we make it something more common, we're going to be able to have more traction within all the industries. If hemp becomes more of a common plant rather than this such like mystic aspect to it, then we're able to get into all of these industries and explore their potential. Because when you get into one industry, specifically companies, they want to grab all of the knowledge and produce the best product because it's up to their it's to their best interest to do so. And so really being able to showcase the plant, showcase that it's not that mystical, that it's actually just a better solution, definitely will provide with the industry a better way of expanding rather than excluding themselves into a very specific segment in the United States and in the world.
Thank you very much for joining us here on What Canna Radio, where we bring a dose of reality to your conversations about hemp every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you enjoyed what you heard, please smash that like button below for our YouTube overlords, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel so you can be the first to know the secrets we reveal. If you need another dose of reality right this moment, check out the video up here, or if you want to see what YouTube has to offer you, check out the videos over here or down below. Thank you very much for joining us and have a mind-expanding day.